What up, what up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs. Chip.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Busy from the Burbs of the Massive Ton, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I hope all is well. My co-hosts are off today, no guests. Straight information from the horse's mouth. So what are we talking about today? Joe Biden declared that he would not be running for the Democratic presidential nomination in the 2016 election. Now, what does that mean? And I only want to briefly touch on this because I've reached a point of saturation and fatigue insofar as politics are concerned. That makes it really difficult for me to spend any significant amount of time talking about this. So, what does that mean? In short, what that means is that the race is decidedly between Bernie and Clinton. That's the outcome. That's the decisive. That's the product of this announcement. Is that with Biden bowing out, every other person on that stage, from Chafee to Webb to I don't even know what his name was, the Maryland gentleman, they're all basically irrelevant. I don't even think that the candidates are going to draw from that pool to select their vice. I don't even know if Hillary is, made any selections. There was word that she might be choosing Julian Castro, who is billed as both quote unquote attractive and charismatic. That by the Daily Beast Matt Lewis. But I don't know. Hopefully she never gets fucking elected she never gets the nomination. For those who don't know, I am not a Hillary supporter. I am an ardent I'm an anti-dynastician. I'm an anti-dynastic political person. I'm anti-monarchy. I'm anti-dynasty. I don't care, even if you have good ideas, like Trudeau was just elected as Prime Minister of Canada. I think is he better than Stephen Harper? You would have to be an idiot to not agree that he's a better choice for Canada than Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper's just awful, god awful, what happened to Canada under his reign. That went on for 8 years. This is what happens when you have, when you don't have term limits, Granted, most prime ministers tend to relent, tend to give up their power after a certain amount of time. But I don't believe that, any politician should be able to run and lead and hold the highest place of authority in the country interminably. That's ridiculous. We might as well just go back to kings and queens. As an American, monarchies are my anathema. I recoil in sickness and horror when I encounter a country such as Saudi Arabia, such as Thailand, in which you can't even speak ill. You can't say a bad word about the ruling power without risking imprisonment or some kind of charges of some sort of some sort. It's ridiculous to me. People are not born to lead. You're not a born leader. I reject that notion firmly. It's written into my BIOS. I can't override it. I don't know. Like, even in the example of Trudeau, who is, absolutely a better choice than Harper, I can't help but have this knee-jerk, I think it's classically American. It's an American reaction to this guy whose his own father was prime minister. It's not a family business. This isn't like a hardware store where you hand it down generation to generation. Leadership is not something that you're born into. Leadership is something which is forever changing. And I was just talking about this with a friend of mine. We were listening to This Week in Startups, and Jason Calacanis had the CEO, or who would be the CEO, of Zappos on, who was talking about this system of governance called holacracy. Holacracy, for those who don't know, is this is from the wiki, a social technology or system of organizational governance in which authority and decision-making are distributed throughout a hierarchy of self-organizing teams rather than being vested in a management hierarchy. You get a lot of people who reject the notion of communism, and rightfully so, because it is death by bureaucracy. Distribution of food, your decisions on military expenditures or just healthcare expenditures, you're waiting on the top to filter down that information to the people that matter in the situations. And you just become broken by the sheer the data intensive, the processing intensive needs of a system like that. That's why communism failed as opposed to capitalism, in which it was more distributed. But now we've seen the emergence in full strength of crony capitalism, and with advances in data analytics and computer processing power, the notion of a government, which is some kind of computer communist society, computerism, is not so far-fetched anymore. It actually might be quite effective. If I had the choice between being governed by an artificial intelligence or Hillary Clinton, I would choose the artificial intelligence 10 times out of 10. Because I know that the AI can't be bought. The AI is beholden to no special interests. The AI has no strings attached. Of course, you could make the case that the inventors, the programmers, the developers who worked on the AI could have built something into its firmware that would make it favor, interests or the lives of those who developed it. But it's theory. We're talking theoretical situation within theoretical situation, so we'll just stop. But holacracy makes so much more sense to me. I don't buy into the fact that people believe that there are some people who are born to lead. I used to work with a Bangladeshi who believed that. Born to lead, he'd say. This the same man who, not until too many years ago, still believed or espoused the caste system from that region of the world. I think it's within everyone's ability to lead, and I think that different people are better predisposed to lead at different times. And I think that by electing a single individual to the single most powerful position of authority in any given organization is intrinsically fragile, is intrinsically a fragile move, opening you up to some pretty devastating consequences in the event of the unspeakable, in the event even of a situation in which, there's no clear path, there's no clear, easily determined course of action. I think it's necessary for us to embrace this holacracy, which by any other definition would be anarchy. And that's what we're talking about in anarchy. We're not talking about set fire to your church, set fire to your government offices. Anarchy, strictly speaking, if you proceed from the undergirding of what would be a sane and rational anarchy, you would proceed forth from the principle of non-aggression, meaning that, and I'll get the dictionary definition. The non-aggression principle states that no force should be initiated by one person against another. It's considered to be a defining principle of libertarianism. I think maybe I am more libertarian in some sense. I feel like libertarianism is like the thinly veiled anarchism that many would seek to distance themselves from, because anarchy, when you hear anarchy, you think of blood flowing in the streets and just complete and total lack of any semblance of order. But that's a misnomer. It's a misunderstanding. It's a misinterpretation. It's easy for me to say that it is a misinterpretation, that it is a misunderstanding, when you can point to places in the world where anarchy has failed, or where we call it anarchy when in fact it's really just, this is a mislabeling. That is not an anarchy. That is a failed state. A failed state does not necessarily mean anarchy. Iraq is not necessarily anarchic. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that if people are just allowed to self-organize, that the world will be a much more peaceful place. And yet you have to confront, as an anarchist, and this is why I'm not all in on the movement, the libertarian movement, when you have anarcho-capitalists who espouse the belief that if the market that market forces dictate everything, and that if you just deregulate the system, that everything will work itself out. Why? Because people won't want to buy medicine from companies if they know there's cyanide in it and it's killing people. that market forces will dictate. I agree up to a certain point. I think that the FDA does more at this point with the graft and the cronyism and the corruption that's rife in government in general, whether it's FDA, DEA, CIA, FBI, whoever it is, whichever government organization, and particularly Congress. Totally just lost my train of thought there. Thanks, Congress. But you have anarcho-capitalists who espouse this belief that if the free market were just allowed to reign supreme, that everything would be fine and dandy. I tend to agree with them to an extent. There comes a point of diminishing returns whereby you have to consider, well, what about conflict resolution? How do you, if you have two competing brands, essentially, how do you arbitrate a dispute between those two brands? If one side is getting into a fight with another side, if there's a disagreement, if there's an argument, if there is a crime that is committed, how do you solve that? There's no incentive on part of the little guy in that situation. They get fucking steamrolled every time, 10 times out of 10. So there are failures to anarchy. There are failures to these systems. We need to consider a future that's more distributed. We need to consider a future of governance which is not so open, so easily corrupted. We need to consider a future economic system, I alluded to this in the last podcast, which is not grounded in, at this point, ancient history, ancient historical beliefs about what life should be like and what life should consist of, and consider a future in which life and work, are not synonymous. These are not things that you should not have to work in the Puritan sense of the word. You should still work, but it should be more of a vocation, more of a hobby. You should do what you love. And you shouldn't have to worry about, Johnny's college tuition or Susie's medical bills. You shouldn't have to worry about spending over $100,000 just to have a child in an American hospital. Life should be celebrated, and a path should be made apparent, and people shouldn't have to worry. The counter argument to that is, well, then there's no incentive to make progress. That's total bullshit. Progress will be made regardless. Now, I can't speak to the fact that psychologically human beings are motivated much more effectively by the threat of punishment than by the potential for reward. I think that's grounded in some psychological truth, but it's not a way to live. And there's no way to say that given a longer span of time, that those same goals would be achieved in a reward society versus a punishment society. We need to figure this the fuck out, because it wasn't until too long ago that we didn't even have child labor laws. And in many parts of the world today, they don't have child labor laws. A child 8, 9, 10 years old should not be making things in a factory. Am I fucked up here? Maybe I'm fucking wrong. If I'm wrong, then, somebody do something, because I don't think that that's what kids should be doing. I don't know. What else is new? So there's a much bigger conversation to have about the future of economic systems, the future of government, but we will not have it now. So holacracy, I want to point you to that. And this all started with Biden's not running. In other news, this from Wired. This news writing bot is now free for everyone. I'm thinking about implementing this on Get Busy because none of my writers are coming through, particularly myself. I just don't have the time often, or I'm so deep in Facebook. I really need to extricate myself from Facebook. That's the problem. Like, they've made it so easy to share content, and there's so much content within the what is it called? The ecosphere, the ecosystem of Facebook, that I don't have to do so much publishing elsewhere because it's so easy. But with that said, I hope to make getbusypodcast.com the go-to source for the information that comes across my feed that I find interesting, that I've grown accustomed to posting on my Facebook. If you're friends with me on Facebook, then you know the type of content that you expect from me is kind of interesting, I'd like to say. As a curator of interesting information, I try to make sure that my friends or my community, my social network is kept abreast of those things which I find cool and interesting. This is an article that I mean to post, and this is a technology that I want to implement into getbusypodcast.com, talking with the developers at Squaresoft who administrate the site, my site, if we can implement this. But for those who don't know, in the future, the robots are going to take your jobs. All right? This speaks to the economic talk that we need to have that I talked about here just prior to this. The robots are coming to take your jobs. If you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you are a scientist, if you are an artist, if you are whatever you are, they're coming for you. They're coming for you right now. And one way that they're coming for you, as far as journalism is concerned, is in the form of these machine learning algorithms which digest incredible sums of text and build lexical models off of that digestive process, produce these lexical models that they then can use to create new works. And this harkens back to a project idea that I've been working on called the MC Bot, or the Rappertron, or whatever you want to call it, the Auto Poet. I want to develop, and I've been in contact with some machine learning researchers at a university in Sweden, and there's another group out of China who's doing great work, specifically to disrupt hip-hop. My goal was pretty naive, pretty short and succinct, I think. That was, I just want to disrupt Kanye West. The goal was this, and we were going to use Amadeus Stampede, who's been on the podcast previously, or Tupac, as the kind of the starting model for this. Originally, the tool was conceived by me as a means by which to allow MCs to get greater insight into their craft, into their art, into their music. That was just for MCs. I mean, the same could be extended to songwriters or speech writers or authors. The technology was fairly extensible, but I wanted to develop this piece of software that was a machine learning algorithm that could take the sum of your work and then statistically deconstruct it, and then you would visualize the data kind of handsomely and be able to really view kind of an interesting visual analysis of the way in which you use language. That would be one component, is just data visualization of the data. The other part of it would be a machine learning algorithm with a permutation or a novel creation, a generator function, whereby you could set a few different parameters at the outset. You could click generate, and it would automatically start churning out works. Ideally, the theory is that inherent in the way that an MC uses words, uses language, based on an analysis of the body of work of a given MC or poet, speechwriter, or author, that there is within that body of work an invisible rule set that is being applied by the author, by the creator, to produce those works, whether they're raps, 16-bar raps, or whether they are presidential speeches, or whether they are Shakespearean sonnets. There is an invisible rule at work, linguistically, lexically, that's taking place, that's being executed in the supercomputer that is the human brain, that is producing those lyrics, those words, in those sequences. Now, this might sound a little Bible codey, and I don't intend it to, but looking at the collocations, looking at there's a lot of language that goes to this. But looking at the surrounding mesh of words and not significances, but there's a word, surrounding mesh of meaning or implied meaning or association. The associative mesh, that's what I'm looking for. Looking at this associative mesh, you can extract this rule set and then, in theory, hopefully, use it to build new works that, if you refine the model, the lexical model, the linguistic harvesting what's the word for a scientific implement? It's not an armature. It's the apparatus that you can subsequently go on to build new novel works of art. These would be linguistic works of art. I'm sure in principle you could do the same thing with the visual arts. If you were to digest enough images of a given artist, right? And even going so far as to kind of do one of those X-ray analyses of a painting, whereby you're able to identify given brushstrokes, and then you take the dimensions of the artist's actual hand, their height, their left-handedness versus right-handedness, or their ambidexterity, or whatever it is. The goal is, if you get enough of these data points together, that you could build a virtual model of that painter and then produce new works of art based on those rule sets. So, back to the lecture at hand. What was I talking about? This news writing bot is now free for everyone. The robots are coming for your jobs. There is a new piece of software that's being made available by a company called Automated Insights, which allows you to produce computer-generated stories at like the ones that are being produced by the Associated Press. For those who don't know, for some time you may have been reading a procedurally generated article and had no clue. This is especially true in finance. In finance, it's especially true. The Wired article goes on to say that there's a competitor, Narrative Science, that works with large customers to create the templates that the Wordsmith software fills in. This news service allows anyone to create their own templates and dump data into them on their own. So what I want to do is implement this. I still want to develop this tool for writers to give them some insight into their psychology as a writer, into their word usage, and then produce a recommendation engine that empowers writers to finally and completely and utterly destroy and delete and override writer's block, and also empower them with the ability to not really, if they don't want, and this was my goal, was they don't have to write lyrics anymore. We just produce the AI, the rudimentary linguistic AI that's able to do what they had spent years doing. The thing is, this might be firmly rejected by purists in hip-hop because they might say, well, you're doing that with a computer program. This could become like the new auto-tunes of the music industry, which is like, not only is your voice artificially tuned to be in tune, but so are your lyrics. Your lyrics are procedurally generated. There might be some backlash. My master plan was to produce this piece of software and then flood the market with these artificial hip-hop entities and just basically completely, utterly oversaturate the market with these invisible cyber MCs who, for all intents and purposes, by those listening, would be real people. Of course, the whole vocal synthesis, that's an entire other component to the idea. But that was my goal, was just to basically flood the market with, potential potential MCs or MCs who would potentially catch on, and maybe one of them would take off in terms of name recognition or the confluence of factors that give rise to a successful artist. There's no way to engineer that. I was just attempting to figure out a way to brute force it, because there are certain names which test well with audience, certain names that don't, certain sounds that test well, certain sounds that don't. So that was my goal, was to affect that. And unfortunately, the researchers that I was working with in China, Sweden, were not quick to respond. Like this has already been developed. This piece of software that automatically generates hip hop lyrics, this has already been done by grad students in computer science programs at universities around the world. It's been done multiple times. And I was in talks with the Swedish researcher to get him to open source that code and I wanted to use Amadeus. Amadeus the Stampede, for those who don't know, is a Boston area rapper. He's a good friend of mine and colleague for many years. I played countless shows with him and recorded countless tracks with him. And he is the most prodigious, prolific MC that I know of in Boston. Now, there's also Slim Pickens, who I also had on the last a few podcasts ago. Slim Pickens, the Iron Helmet, who is also prolific. I mean, these gentlemen are constantly producing work, constantly writing rhymes. And it's a shame that, they haven't been given the recognition that I think they deserve. And is that to say that there isn't some MC out there who is producing even more than them? No, that's a possibility, although it is a slim, no pun intended, possibility. These two guys, have upwards of 700 songs. The amount of work that they've put in is just unbelievable. There's another artist, different genre. His name's Buckethead. He's a guitarist. He's put out his... How many albums does Buckethead have? Buckethead discography... He says he's been involved in 408 different album projects. And he presumably has upwards of 226 solo albums, which is tremendous when you think about it. And I had advanced a conspiracy theory and had talked about it on Facebook with Ben Goertzel and his son Amadeus Goertzel, that maybe Buckethead had made an alliance with an artificial intelligence researcher, and they had used machine learning to basically virtualize Buckethead as a musician. But that was we kind of talked that away. That no, Buckethead is the real deal. He's just as prolific like Amadeus or Slim. Just constantly working. That rate of output, I don't know. I look at it two ways, because that can be a double-edged sword. Like, if you're producing so much work, there is a potential. And a good friend of mine, who has since defriended me from Facebook, but that's a whole other conversation, who I spent a lot of time in Boston while I was there making hip-hop with, for the sake of this, what I'm about to say, we'll just refer to him as Math. Math was of the mind that actually, no, he might say that just because he has 226 albums, that doesn't mean that there are 226 good albums. That just because you produce a lot doesn't mean it's good, right? He'll give the quality over quantity. And this coming from a guy who's recorded quite a number of tracks, but because of his perfectionist approach, he's shackled by his own perfectionism and is unable to release his work because it's never finished in his mind. And what I've resigned myself to, and it's difficult from an artist who takes their craft seriously to put stuff out there. But as an artist who is a perfectionist, you have to temper that perfectionism with the understanding that the art is always incomplete, that it's a living document, and it's never finished except in the mind of the listener, or in the mind of the beholder, of the viewer, of the spectator, of the fan. It doesn't get finished until it's registered in the synaptic clefts of those, in the neurons of those who are listening to it or are enjoying it. then it could be said to be approaching a point of completion, but never before that. And even when it's in the mind of the listener, even when it's in their neurons, it's been encoded as a memory, it's still not done. It's still alive. So when you choose to release it or when you don't choose to release it, it's up to you. Now, I have a lot of work. I have over 200 tracks that are unreleased, of work that I had recorded, but I was infected by this perfectionist bug, and my releases dropped significantly. I had some stuff that I released. I released it to YouTube exclusively. It was some of my best work, I think, too. But I had since, uh, you know, not gone forward with releases, while colleagues of mine, friends of mine, like Jake the Snake, Jay the S, Amadeus the Stampede, Slim Pickens, right, the Iron Helmet, countless others, SETI, the Greater Good, which was the group that I was part of and still claim allegiance to in an Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of spiritual sense. They went forward to release countless works of art, countless albums. And I can't think but what might have been had I released these songs, which, when you listen to them, there's something there. Like, I obviously had, or still have to this day, I have some ability to make a song as a lyricist, but it just never translated. And when you're in Boston, I don't mean to tangent this away from the machine learning, but when you're in Boston, Boston is a crucible of a location for an artist. You will find very little in the way of positive acceptance among your peers. It's very cliquish. It's very dangerous as an artist to live and to seek out some semblance of success there, because I think it's all artists, and as such, artists are some of their biggest critics. Whereas in a place like New York or LA, you have a much wider cross section of types of people. It's not all artists, it's not all entertainers. There's a higher population, and as such, and this is just my theory, but because of that, you have a much greater chance of winning fans. When you are from a city in which 90% of the city are artists in some regard, or regard themselves as artists to some degree, it's very difficult to win a fan base. That isn't to say that it doesn't happen. It does, but when I was coming up there was an utter lack of management. I was doing it all myself, and I felt like that was the way to do it. So, wow, huge tangent there, or not so much. But music, living the life of an artist in Boston is a difficult one. Now, moving on. What else? So the machine learning algorithm, I'm looking to implement that. Theranos CEO, this is also from Wired. Theranos CEO calls the Wall Street Journal a tabloid at Wall Street Journal's own conference. The embattled CEO of Theranos was under some scrutiny, and I haven't really read into it that much, but apparently it was something having to do with the testing, the diagnostics testing equipment that she was using. And she faced some scrutiny, some criticism by the Wall Street Journal as a result of that. Theranos here we are. This is going to go down in history as the podcast in which I talk about all of my failed ideas that other people went on to do. That's basically what this is. This is the Pity Party podcast, ladies and gentlemen. But Theranos is a cool company. It's doing something technologically which I saw years ago, an open market for basically customized uh, 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 health and nutrition kind of blood serological analysis a service or a device. A device or a service that's able to give you live updates as to your the environment, your bodily, how would I say, the maybe I should just define it as to what its function would be. The function of the device would be, and whether it's Theranos or whether it's half a dozen other wearables or one that has yet to emerge in the near future, my idea was to produce a transdermal patch with a microfluidics lab on a chip that was capable of running these tests, right? That you would normally get through a company like Quest Diagnostics or some other testing company where you'd have to take the blood or you take the sample and you'd send it off to the lab and then you'd get the results, a week or two later. Instead of that, what I wanted was something leveraging the work of Robert Langer, who is an esteemed engineer at MIT, who is the most patented engineer in engineering, I'm pretty sure. He did a lot of work on nebulizers and drug delivery through the skin using nebulization technology, and it has applications in diabetes where people have to measure their blood glucose level, but non-destructively or non-invasively. Basically, what I wanted to do is pair his technology with these advances in microfluidics coming out of microfluidics. I'm not sure what the division, what the department is called or whatever, but microfluidics labs on a chip allow you to conduct these. I don't know what the scale is, how many, but I'm going to say hundreds of different experiments on a very small microchip. And I wanted to marry that with this kind of really sleek, really easy to use user interface that would tell you if you are lacking a certain vitamin, nutrient, based on your, analyzing your blood through your skin transdermally using the Langer patch or nebulization technology. Theranos has gone on to do that, and there are a number of other companies that are doing it as well. In the future, I foresee, and this is already happening, you have a paradigm shift whereby you're going away from the traditional standard model of top-down, one-size-fits-all kind of healthcare, and you're approaching what's called custom-tailored health solutions or personalized health revolution, wherein your own everything about you, all of your body metrics, and this coincides with what's happening in quantified self as well. If not, this isn't. If not, this is the what you would call like the capstone of the quantified self movement, is this device that exists somewhere at the end of time or at the top of the quantified self pyramid, which is the device which gives you, an infinite knowledge of your body and the processes going on, and empowers you with the data and the information and the suggestions to optimize that system. This is not like, an Onnit.com kind of, you're just mindlessly taking supplements thinking that, okay, this is going to do the trick. No, in the future, the technology will be much more custom tailored, where you have, you know, a snapshot of what's happening to your body, in your body, and you have custom tailored prescriptions or custom tailored exercise regimens that are prescribed to you, specific to you, and you alone, based on your own biometric, picture. The Theranos CEO was under fire, presumably for the accuracy of her testing. This is something that's really interesting, actually, that I want to read more into. But apparently now it's an entire scandal. I have to read this for you. She said the journals claim Theranos was using its proprietary Edison technology to run just 15 of more than 200 tests it offers was irrelevant because Edison was a company codename for old tech it doesn't use anymore. She said the journal failed to provide the proper context for the way it tests the proficiency of its fingerstick blood tests, and she said the journal misrepresented the issues around the fact that it uses blood drawn from finger pricks. The method at the heart of Theranos' promise to put an end to the painful practice of drawing vials of blood from patients' veins for just one of its tests. In its piece, the journal said that Theranos had dialed back its finger prick testing under pressure from regulators. Holmes said the company was merely taking a hiatus as it made a voluntary switch to a more rigorous approval process. If you have cars driving on a road, quote, and I'm going to take everybody from driving on the right side of the road to the left side of the road, the only way to do that is to pause, she said. Anyway, this company raised a shit ton of money. And I guess what this goes down in history as is just a technology which wasn't ready yet, and investors are feeling upset because she's been unable to deliver on her promise that she made, her technological promises. When I first heard about this, and she's 31 years old, and she's like the wealthiest female in science or technology. At first, I was a little jealous because, like, I had this idea to do this years ago, but just didn't have access to the people or the academic background. I'm a nobody, essentially. I'm not a scientist. I was a little jealous, but then I was like, well, this is cool. Like, I don't care. It's kind of like the V.S. Ramachandran conclusion that, okay, like someone was going to do this. Either I was going to do it or somebody else was going to do it. And I'm not mad that somebody else was going to do it because this is just inevitable. And rising tide, high tide raises all boats or whatever. So I wasn't too concerned afterwards, but now I'm a little frustrated because this is obvious, like there's a market need for this technology, but it seems like, I don't know, she's failed to make good on the promise, or she didn't make the right alliances, or she didn't keep the stakeholders that were necessary in the loop, or maybe this is a deliberate means to kind of sabotage the product so that a competing product by a company with vested interests in this field of science and technology can emerge as the market leader. I don't know. There's a lot of shadowiness. There's a lot of gray area going on here. We're nearing the end of the podcast. You have to forgive my rambling style. I hope that this podcast entertained you or informed you This is more informative than entertaining. I need to get funnier. Not funny enough. But if you enjoyed the podcast, please click the PayPal link. Donate to the podcast. We're coming all out of pocket for this. This is, we're shouldering all the expenses. I want to be able to enjoy life, and short of a robot revolution and us, graduating to a gift economy of post-scarcity and abundance, I need to pay bills. And I have student loans, and I have rent, and, a family, an emerging family, a prospective family. So I need to pay bills, and we need to pay the bills for the website and the graphic designer and SoundCloud and the hosting service and Amazon Web Services and so on and so forth. So please, if you feel it in your heart, if you're feeling generous, please donate to the podcast. I have not been, and this is my own fault, I have not been including the PayPal link. I will go back and paste it in to each of the videos soon. I've been meaning to do that. We're also upgrading to the more expensive SoundCloud. So finally, and we're getting the graphic design in. So we'll be on iTunes shortly. Thanks for bearing with us. Thanks for watching on YouTube. We appreciate it. Please comment, like, and share this. I don't care how seemingly meaningless you feel like a click or a like or a share might be. It is the lifeblood that feeds these kinds of endeavors. Without social interaction, without the community chiming in, without people liking it, without people sharing it, we significantly decrease in the public eye, just in general. And I have no intention of quitting. I see myself doing this interminably, but we do need that support. So please click like, share, and help us reach a wider audience. We thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good afternoon. We'll catch you on the next podcast. Some great guests coming up. Hopefully next week we'll have that. And stay tuned. Thank you very much. World peace.